So on Tu B'Shvat, I want to just start off with an interesting side point, which is going to sound like a really stupid joke, but the purpose of it is really, I realized later, it's the epitome of the entire class. Like the goal of the class, which you'll see in a few minutes, is hidden, and that's the appropriate word, in this joke. So there's a story which took me a long time till somebody finally found me the source for it, which I'm sure you've heard before, and that is, how was it determined where to build the Beit HaMikdash, where to build the temple? Everybody know the story, the two brothers, the rich brother, the poor, okay, so I'll say for those that don't. Two brothers, one's very rich, one's very poor. The one that's very poor is married, has like a ton of kids. The one that's very rich is like not married at all, or if he is, he doesn't have any kids. And they both wake up the same night, in the middle of the night, and the poor brother thinks, you know, my poor rich brother, he's there with all that money, but he has no like homemade apple pie. He doesn't have anything that's like warm and personal. I'm going to get up, I'm going to make him some really yummy, and I'm going to go, and I know he would never take it, so I'm going to sneak into his house, and I'm going to put it in the kitchen, he'll discover it in the morning. In the meantime, his rich brother wakes up and says, you know, my gosh, my brother, he's got so many kids, they're barely making a living, I know that he would never take charity from me, so I'm going to take a bundle of money, sneak into his house, and I'm going to put it in the house, and he won't know it's from me, and I know that I'll give him money. And as they're walking, they bump into each other, and each one realizes what the other one does, and they hug as brothers. And it comes out and says, that is where the temple will be built, where brothers can meet like that. Now there's the new version. How did they determine where to build the Knesset? So, same story. There are two brothers. One's really rich, one's really poor. The one that's really rich wakes up and says, "Wow, the heck's with my brother? He's got 15 kids, he won't miss a few. I'm going to go over there and kidnap some of his kids and I'll take them back to my house." And the poor brother's like, "Wow, he's sitting on so much money, I'm going to go over there and rob some money. He won't miss it, won't matter." And the two of them, as they're heading out to kidnap and rob, they bump into each other and they beat the living daylights out of each other. They said, that's where the Knesset will be built. Now, the reason I thought of that is because the 50th, i.e. Nun Shari Bina, the 50th anniversary of the Knesset is Tu B'Shvat this year. So that's an interesting thing. What is really Tu B'Shvat? Why is Tu B'Shvat the third and final Geula, the redemption? And how does it really tie into that which is the least apparent? That's sort of what we're going to get to. And to build that, going step by step along the way, the first question that really comes up is, it's kind of funny that you have Tree New Year in the middle of the winter, like the least, I mean, when we have New Year's, right, we go with those little plastic hammers, we're hitting each other and spray painting and so on. But you would think like when trees would want to party, they would like want to be standing there, like fully blossomed, right, with all their flowers and all of their fruits and all the rest of it. So one, and next one, right, they're all impressing each other, how awesome they are, and these blossoming trees. But instead, they're having like a New Year's where everything's dead. There's no fruit, there's no leaves, it's like barren, it's really, why? Why should this be? Okay, so we know from the Gemara in Yerushalmi that in fact this is the transition time between the winds that happened before Tu B'Shvat, impact the growth of the earlier year, has a lot to do with agricultural laws and so on. But really on a much deeper level, Nachman Bolman Zechron Bracha once explained as follows. He said that in the nature of the growth of the tree, you put the seed into the ground, and one of the miracles of nature is that the seed completely decomposes. It decomposes to the point where it actually looks like there's nothing left to it. And at the moment when there's nothingness of the seed, something turns the corner and now it begins to come back together. And from that coming back together again begins its growth. So he said that the whole idea of Tu B'Shvat and the idea of the New Year of the trees, which we'll see later why this is the ultimate and the final of the three Geulot of the redemptions, is that there are things which we cannot see on the surface, where everything seems to be completely lost and helpless, and there's no sign of life whatsoever, could actually be just the opposite. It could really be the ultimate turning point of the sign of life, of the ultimate life itself. And so therefore, this is kind of, we see this in Purim as well. We see that Purim is a time I mean, we sit back and we are Sunday or Monday morning quarterbacks where we look at the Purim story, we know the ending already. But if we actually lived during that time, that was a mega Holocaust. And there was no United States or Shanghai to run to. It was global. It was everywhere. And for 6, 8, 9, 11 months, everywhere Jews went, they just saw other people sharpening their swords and looking at them, kind of like they're sharpening their knives now. And it looked like there was no hope, nowhere whatsoever. And yet, and ironically, it turned around to be completely that which was hidden is actually that which is ultimately revealed. That's why it's even called Megillah Esther. It's Megaleh Nistar. It reveals that which is hidden. This is called God's most holy book, and yet his name never appears in it once, because everything is hidden. But we'll get to that a little bit later. So this is the key idea of Tu B'Shvat. It's the ultimate. It's the ultimate where there is no hope whatsoever. All seems to be lost. And at that very moment is the beginning of the redemption. So the other thing which is also we're going to now look at is the concept of trees. Because obviously Tu B'Shvat is all about the trees. And the question really is that we know that when God commanded the trees to come into the world, God commanded it in a way where the bark of the tree would have the same taste as the fruit of the tree. And so the question actually is, it's again coming back to the Gemara in Yerushalmi. Gemara asks the question, what were actually the sin of the earth, which really means the sin of the tree, right? Because we know that the trees were punished, and the trees were only punished once man sinned. So one question we'll get to later is, why should man sinning or not sinning be connected to a tree? And the other question is, how can a tree sin? A tree doesn't have free will. So how is it possible at all for the tree to,
You jumped a step, I'm sorry.
Please.
Where is this trees sinning, fruit trees, there's
Yeah, no, I'm getting to that.
Oh, you're getting it?
Yeah,
Sorry.
that's okay. Please do that.
Sorry.
Please, everybody, anytime you ever want to interrupt, please do, because it gives me a shot at the water. Water. So the Gemara Kalayim in Yerushalmi asks a question like this. He says, the Gemara asks, why was the earth cursed at the same time man was cursed? Of course, the earth here is a reference because of what happened with the trees. So the Gemara offers one answer. It says, because God commanded the earth to bring trees, as we said before, that not only had fruit, but the bark had the same taste as the fruit. But instead, except for a few exceptions, like the esrog and the pepper, pilpul, they only created trees that the fruit tastes like the fruit, but the bark did not. The other Tana answers as follows. He said that really, it did create trees that had this and didn't have that, but it also created trees which didn't bear fruit at all. Okay, so that's not a sin. It's like kind of doing more than God said. God said do this. They did do that, and they also made trees that don't produce any fruit. So the Gemara says, according to the second opinion then, why was the earth punished? What did it do wrong? And the Gemara answers, it's like the curse that people say, may the breast of the woman that nursed that man be cursed. Since Adam had destroyed the world with his sin, the earth, Adam's mother, was also cursed. And this is, the Talmud says, 3 people went into court. There was Adam, Eve, and a snake. And 4 people came out of the court, all of them guilty. The 4th one being the earth. Because obviously you don't see God asking the earth, why did you do what you do? So it still brings back the question of, how can a tree sin? And not only how can a tree sin, but how could it be attached to man's sin? I mean, what is the connection there? So we're going to go in a few minutes to the basic assumption of the relationship between man and tree. But before we do it, I want to set up something which is actually based on the writings of the Or Gedaliahu, which is really very brilliant. The Or Gedaliahu says there are 2 cycles that function within the world that we live. There is the function of teva, of nature, and this is ein chadash tachat hashemesh. There is nothing new within the world of nature. Nature is as it is. And then there's an inner cycle, which is actually a higher cycle, which is the cycle of Torah. The cycle of Torah is lamala min hashemesh, and therefore it is always chadash. And that is Rosh Chodesh Zeh Lechem, that Hashem split the sea of nature and said to the Jewish people, I am going to offer you an alternative track in the world of creation. This track will be above the laws of nature. It'll be above death, it'll be above the Yetzer Hara, it'll be above all of these things, which is what we experienced in Mount Sinai. When we sin, we disconnect from that higher level, and we fall back to the default world of nature. However, there's this inner cycle where we have this ability to achieve a greater. So therefore, the world that God created is a world that is set up for doom. It is set in its very nature to be destructive. It is about tzimtzum. It is about constriction of light. It is about breaking vessels. It is about complete deterioration, falling further and further and further from the obvious light of God. That is the natural order. And we see it in nature, how things die, everything dies, it decomposes. This is the world we live in. So the natural world would be a world, from the word olam, alam, it would hide God. The whole purpose of the world was to create the ultimate hide-and-go-seek between man with free will to choose to find God or not to find God. And therefore, the world itself would be the platform which would hide God. So therefore, the idea of the tree not tasting like its fruit meant that the trunk of the tree, if you will, which we'll see later in the analogy to man, is like the body of the person, is that the actions that happened in this world will not reveal God. In the end, if the trunk is action, fruit is reward, or the results of action. So the fruits will ultimately bear. We will ultimately see what that tree was really all about. But Shas Maaseh, at the moment of action, it'll be not revealed. It'll be hidden. So therefore, when man, now standing at the crossroads of creation, will he, she opt to follow the rule of God or renege? So the moment that Adam and Eve pulled the lever and turned it away from God, man now fell into creation of the natural order, and therefore the destructive nature was now in place. So the tree was not really sinning. The tree was creating the scenario of this destructive natural nature that once man decided that that's the plane he wanted to live on, so now retroactively, that would be the plane he would live on. Retroactively, the destructive nature of the world would unfold itself because man opted for destruction rather than construction. So that becomes the relationship. And now we have to take a deeper look at what is really the connection between the two. But before we do, I want to share with you a very esoteric Gemara from Chulin. The Gemara there says, it seems to just be a little expression, but when you tie it to the context of the class tonight, it's very, very deep. In fact, it's the fundamental idea of the entire class, similar to the Knesset joke, but where the Knesset might be Tzibor, might be us as a nation, really, this is about us as individuals. The Gemara says an expression. It says, the Talmud says it itself, the Talmud has an expression. If somebody says something which is a weak argument, if somebody says something which is silly or it's not really strong in the nature of Talmudic battle, and all of a sudden they say something that's, I mean, in yeshiva language you call it krum shot, right? It's really not the good answer. So the Talmud didn't know krum shot. I know that they thought that Adam and Eve spoke Yiddish, but they didn't. However, Talmud had its own expression. What was the Talmudic expression? The Talmudic expression says, that is like a cracked vav written on a trunk of a tree. What does that mean? What does that mean? Okay, so it's simple, right? You try to take your marker and you move it on the tree because the bark, it's going to bark, right? It's going to not really go down well. It's going to not be fluid. It's not going to be solid. But certainly that's not what this is just talking about here. The vav, in the idea, the Sfat Emet explains when we talk about one aspect of God creating man in the image of God, especially since God has no image, that's kind of like, huh? But one approach to that, the Sfat Emet says, if you look at the name of God, Yud Kei Vav Kei, these are the human beings. So that the Yud is the head of a person, just like the Yud, which is the only letter that doesn't touch the baseline. So therefore it's that which is the spiritual in its highest concept. The Heys are the two hands that take Yud, which is 10, and break it down into 5 and 5 So when we have an idea, we know how to bring that idea into a world of balance, how to bring it down on both sides. And the vav is the body. The vav is what takes the head, the idea, and brings it into action. Like we said before, the tree's trunk is the equivalent of the human body. So the body is about action. It's about right action. It's about being a tzinur, a pipe that brings godliness into this world. Like the Vilna Gaon says, that the purpose of a human being is to be like a zipper. Every time we do Ratzon Hashem, we do the will of God, we are zipping together the spiritual and the physical world together. And God forbid, every time we don't, we're unzipping that relationship between the two. So the body, in a way, is the zipper. It's what pulls the spiritual world and ties it together with the physical world. So therefore, the vav, which is a broken vav, i.e. on the body, means that somehow the human mind did not correctly understand what the person's supposed to be doing, and therefore their actions in this world were askew. They were broken. They didn't come out clearly. So this is part of the idea of the tikkun of the bark of the tree, is the ultimate tikkun of man himself. And this is why the tikkun of Tu B'Shvat, which we'll talk about later, is the ultimate of the three redemptions, because that will ultimately, it's like A, B, C, C, B, A. The first problem was man in the Garden of Eden with the tree of knowledge versus the tree of life. And ultimately, that will be the tree that needs to be fixed, which will fix everything else in its hindsight. So to take that now to the next step, the question was, I just want to share with this because, we all have this image of Adam and Eve and like the apple. I think I talked about this in the last class. I don't remember now. But I always have this image of like, it's kind of funny if you think about the original story. You have, Adam and Eve, and like all of a sudden they're like munchies and they're eating everything, and they even eat the stuff they're not supposed to eat, and all of a sudden, God comes flying in and says, "Que pasa, senor? What's going on here?" I mean, where was God, right? Shuffleboarding in Miami, and all of a sudden, beep, 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 up, trouble in the Garden of Eden. Dun, 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 and he throws Adam up on the wall, frisks him, and finds like an apple core. I mean, where God knew everything that was going on. What is this text that's happening here? But we're not going to do that tonight. However, the question really is, what were they eating? So there may be, actually I used to say there wasn't, but I found a Zohar that says there might have been actually an apple. But we're not going to go into that. The question of what really the Talmud approaches it is, the Gemara Brachos says that there's an argument between three Tanaim, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Nehemiah, and Rabbi Yehuda. Each one suggests that it was actually the grape, and that's why when Noah came out of the ark, he got drunk on wine, not because he was, God forbid, wanting to get drunk. He was trying to be metaken. He was trying to fix the original sin, and this is why many people say we make Kiddush on Shabbat, because each one of our Kiddush on wine is a tikkun of the original sin. Rabbi Nehemiah says it was the fig tree, because whereas when they realized they were naked and God made them a little fig leaf or a full fig Newton, so then that which they sinned was that which they were repaired from. That's why he learns it was also the fig. And the other one was that it was actually wheat. That according to the Gemara, wheat was originally a tree. It did not become grain until after the sin. But originally it was a tree, and it was the tree of the knowledge of good and bad. Which is interesting because the Gemara Brachos is then backed up many thousands of dapim later in the Gemara Sanhedrin, where again the Gemara says, what was the food? And there it just lays it out. Wine, wheat, or fig. So again, these three ideas of the three Tanoim and Brachos is reflected again in the Gemara in Sanhedrin. But the real question is, we're going to come back to it and we'll see how there's a tikkun of each one of these three fruits, which is all part, if you guys are going to Tu B'Shvat Seders, you'll see the importance of the wine, and fig should be highlighted and so on, and certainly wheat as well. But we know from the Torah in Sefer Devarim, clearly says there that man is like a tree in the field. Now the first question is, why doesn't it just say man is like a tree? Right, that's like the kind of thing about the guy who spends his whole life climbing the Himalayas. He finally gets to the guru, like hanging from the cliff, and he says, man is like a tree. Oh, okay. But so we go a little further. We say, man is like a tree in a field. Now, if it was a tree in a shopping mall, would we not be like that? I mean, right? It was an urban tree. Oh, an urban tree, right? It was an urban tree. No, not why a tree in a field. So we know that field has many connotations. Field, and no pun intended, is the playing field between man as demon and man as human. It's the halfway between Shedim and the idea of Shakai. The God who said enough, set the border, set the Mizgeret, set the parameter of the playing field. This is the idea of din. And therefore, in the field, we rectify din, judgment, through prayer, by asking for rachamim. And this is Yitzchak. Yitzchak is gvura. He has the ability to face din, face judgment, and sweeten it to the point of laughter, thus his name, in the idea of the Sodeh. And that's why he came in from the field. He was, as we know, returning from Mincha. He was returning from that prayer. So man is created for prayer. Man is given the opportunity within the field of this world to rectify the world, to bring it from Gevurah to Chesed, to sweeten judgment, and to turning it into acts of kindness. That is the tree in the Sadah, and that's the relationship between man and the tree. Watch this. The Gemara in Bracha says that there is a blessing. There's a bracha, ironically, it should be the Gemara in Brachas. There's a bracha that says like this: blessed is he who has such in the world. Now this bracha we're going to make on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. It's the bracha that we make on seeing the beautiful trees. But you know what? The same nusach, the same bracha is also made on when you see a beautiful person. It's kind of interesting. I obviously flash back to the 60s with like the beautiful people. But the idea is when you see a beautiful, extraordinarily handsome man or a beautiful woman, there's a bracha to be made. And the bracha is to acknowledge that God made people like this in our world. And so therefore the same blessing which is made on the tree is the same blessing which is made on the man. The parallel gets deeper. The Gemara in Baba Basra says, how did Eov, how did his friends know? I know this is a little hard to imagine. My kids asked me once, a few years ago, they asked me what my email address was when I was in college. So we live in a world now where people can't masik that there was ever a time without internet. So just try to fathom that there was. Some of us are old enough to remember that there was once a time before internet. Therefore, without internet or WhatsApp, how did Job's friends know that Job was in trouble? How? So the Gemara gives an awesome answer. It says that every one of the friends had planted trees, and each tree was given the name of one of the friends. And when they all saw that the tree that had been named for Job was starting to wilt, they realized he was in trouble. A very interesting Gemara about a very deep connection between man and tree. Let's go a little bit further. Gemara Tainus brings Reb Yochanan. Reb Yochanan asks straight out, why is man compared to a tree? And he answers as follows, that a scholar, a Talmid Chacham, a wise person, is like somebody who bears fruit from the tree. If he has good character, then people may eat from this tree, meaning eat from his wisdom, and he may not be cut down, just like a fruit tree may not be cut down. But if his character is bad, notice it doesn't say what his IQ is, and it doesn't say how much he has learned Shas how many times. Even though it's referring to him as a scholar, or her, as somebody who's filled with wisdom, that's not maspeak. It's not enough. It's about the character of the person that is the important ingredient. So therefore, Rabbi Yochanan says, not if he didn't learn enough, but rather, hey, Rabbi Yochanan says, if he's not a mensch, and if he's not a mensch, then if he is rotten to the core, and pun yes intended, so that a person should not eat from such a person's wisdom, and such a tree, like a tree which does not bear fruit, should be cut down. So this is how Rabbi Yochanan correlates again a little bit different between the two levels. Taking it a step further, the question is now, what is the tree? We talked about it, maybe it was a vine, maybe it was a fig, maybe it was wheat. The question is though, what actually, or where actually, was the tree? So the Zohar points out, as we'll see a little bit later towards the end of the class, the Zohar points out that the tree of life, the Eitz HaChaim, and the tree of knowledge were actually the exact same tree. They both grew in the center of Garden of Eden. And according to Einstein, we know that two things cannot occupy the same space at the same time, so therefore it was the same thing. However, the Zohar explains that the tree originated in the same stump and then had two separate trunks, so that the tree came up and then it split into two trees. One of them being the tree of life, and the other one being the tree of knowledge of good and bad. But they all came from the same source. This is, by the way, I know a lot of times when we talk about the Yetzer Hara, which I like to spell as Horror, right? Har. So the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Tov, we have that like Fred Flintstone image. If you remember when he was like crossed between like bing, a little Fred Flintstone with like little halo and a little Fred Flintstone with like horns, and they're fighting between each other which way Fred should go. But the point is that there is no such thing as a Yetzer Hara and a Yetzer Tov. There is only a Yetzer. Yetzer is the driving force to grow and to live. That's what it is. If it's used properly, it functions correctly, and it grows. If it's misused, then that same energy is destructive. The very part of the body that reproduces our cells so that we grow and we live, if God forbid goes amiss, creates cancer. The very part of the body that develops our immune system, if it's amiss and deficient, can make, God forbid, HIV positive. It's all about a question of how it's used. This is hinted at actually in the Gemara in Sanhedrin, which I don't want to go to now, but in brief, when they were capturing the Yetzer Hara, and they captured the immoral Yetzer Hara, and they wanted to kill it, they decided to first put it into prison, and when they did, they realized there wasn't one fresh egg in all of Eretz Yisrael. Because the drive is the drive. It's one tree. The only difference is, do we have a Vav, or is it a broken Vav? Is it the tree of life, or is it the tree of death? In fact, this is hinted at. The Chasam Sofer says that why in the Torah does it say about the Torah, Eitz Chaim Hi Kol HaMazikim Ba? Why does it say that? In what scenario did that come about? Well, we know that when God revealed the first two of the Ten Commandments, many people in the Jewish nation died. Many people were literally blown away, where the Gemara says angels had to bring them back. But there were a lot of people who died and they came back to life. So what happened was, when they died and came back to life in their initial encounter with the Torah, they said to Moshe, whoa, this is the tree of death. We can die from this. To which Moshe said, no, it's not the tree of death. It's the Eitz Chaim Hi. It's the tree of life. Kol machazikim ba. And what's the proof? Yes, you died, but look, you didn't die. You came back to life. It's greater than death. So this idea is really that it's the same tree. The question is our relationship to that tree, which is why we know that Adam and Eve technically were allowed to eat from the tree, how they waited for Shabbat. So now, let's take a look on two levels here. Let's go a little bit into trees, and let's see, according to the Gemara, what is the more specific correlation of man and tree. So we're going to break it into two parts. The Gemaras, there are numerous Gemaras that make a correlation of a tzaddik, and what kind of tree he or she is compared to. And then there are the average Jew, and what kind of tree he or she is compared to. And I always like to say, by the way, a tzaddik is not a saint. A tzaddik, the word tzaddik comes from the word tzad, kuf, the side of holiness. Meaning, King Solomon says that there is no tzaddik who sins, the tzaddik sins 7 times and gets up 8 times. What kind of tzaddik is that? We know in today's world, if one rabbi sins once, poof, that's it, man. He's like gone. Like the news is all over him. Then Facebook is eating him alive, and that's bye-bye down the river, so long, Charlie. Yeah, we talk about tshuva, but we don't really believe in it. So, but according to the days of when they were real Jews, like King Solomon, he says, no, a tzaddik can fall 7 times and get up 8 times. So what kind of tzaddik is that? Guess what? Human is the word I think we're looking for, because that's the human thing. The human thing is we fail. But the human thing to be holy is to stand up, accept that we failed, and become better. So the tzaddik is not a saint. Tzaddik is a human being who will fall. But because they're not an egotist, which is why the Gemara says the Rasha falls once and never gets up, says, I tried yeshiva, I'm out of here. I tried that Jewish stuff, I quit, I tried, see, I'm out of here. Ego. But to the humble man, okay, I failed, what am I anyhow? I'll try again. And so therefore, by that failing and continuing until they reach the level of the 8, which is the infinite, this is every time they're facing a challenge, they go bad or good, holy or impure, they try to go to the side of holiness. Excuse me, that is the tzaddik. So the tzaddik, therefore, is compared in the Gemara in Baba Basra, it says, tzaddikim are compared to two types of trees, the date palm tree and the cedar tree. The cedar tree, because the cedar tree can regenerate itself, again, that same idea of falling 7 times and getting up 8 times, and the palm tree, because the palm tree bears fruit. Now, of course, a lot of trees bear fruit. The question really is why specifically the palm tree, and it ties into this week's Parsha. Because this week's Parsha, you have all of a sudden the Jewish people, after the splitting of the Red Sea, there's no water to drink. The first time there's no water, and what does God do? He shows Moshe a tree. Moshe takes the tree, he throws it into the bitter water, and it turns into drinking water. This is that idea of the tzaddik. The capability of the tree of life to be able to go into the sodeh, into the field of the destructive natural nature of this world, and to convert it into a living, elevated experience, which is the mentality of mankind to be able to spiritually unite and achieve something beyond, above the Shemesh, above the world of nature, something which is forever.